The concept of a sports tribunal is becoming widespread the world over, and Kenya is a trailblazer in this field. In 2014, Kenya became one of the first countries in Africa to set up a sports tribunal. This week on Inside Government, we're talking to the chairperson of the Sports Dispute Tribunal. This is Senior Counsel John Ohaga. We want to look at the history of a sports tribunal, the hit and the misses, and the way forward. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Inside Government.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You see, you're the pioneer chair of this organization. What have you picked along the process?
The first thing I've picked is that government is very bureaucratic. But I've also picked a lot about the way different sports are run in this country. Some sports have a better appreciation for governance than others. I've picked the fact that what ails sports in this country really is having a vision, is proper structures, governance, and a commitment to, or I would say a lack of commitment to professionalism. Because in the end, we want to commercialize sports. We want to ensure that our sports people can earn from sports, can earn from their talents, can earn from their ability. And in order to do that, we need to be able to professionalize our entire sports environment. And so these are some of the things that I think about constantly as chairperson of the Sports Disputes Tribunal.
Very well. I mean, before the tribunal came into force, after the enactment of the Sports Act in 2013, paint to us how disputes were resolved in the sports fraternity.
Well, before the Sports Act came into force, disputes in the sports fraternity had to go to the court, had to go to either the High Court or the Magistrates Court, as the case may be. And they would take as long as any other civil case might take. And that would be anything from 1 year to 5, 6 years. But, the concept of a sports tribunal is founded on the fact and the recognition that a sportsman has a very short shelf life. And so therefore, disputes involving sports must be resolved as quickly as possible to enable the sports person to focus on the exploitation of his talent on the sporting field. When you attend global sporting events, for instance, like the Olympics or the World Cup, you will find that the Court of Arbitration for Sports actually sets up office there and will be available to resolve any disputes within 24 hours or within a specific period so the event can continue to run. You can imagine if there was a dispute around a sporting event such as that and it went to a normal court, the normal court would not be able to handle the timelines within which sports people require disputes to be resolved. And so that is the whole philosophy behind the establishment of a sports tribunal. And so when I think back and I recall how sports disputes used to be handled, I really feel sorry for sports people who had to have their disputes run through the whole gauntlet of the court system. Because again, back to my other life as a lawyer, I'm very, very aware of the frustration that can be experienced in waiting for a court date, waiting for your case to be heard, waiting for witnesses to be called, and waiting for 5-7 years before a decision can be rendered in relation to your matter. So at the Sports Tribunal, we try not to be a court. We try to be what we were created to be, which is a tribunal, to resolve cases as quickly as possible, even if it means sitting long hours, even if it means imposing very short timelines on parties to put their papers in order and to file their papers, we will do that. But we will stay true to what we were created to do, which is to resolve disputes quickly, efficiently, and effectively, and in the interests of the sports person and the mindset of the sportsman.
And I like the fact that you're bringing in the issues of effectiveness and, quickly, because they are very critical in dealing with the disputes around the sports world. Because if you have rightly put it, I mean, the shelf life of a sports person, is very limited. And so when you have, for example, the case of the Athletic Association of Kenya, elections, pending for more than 4 years, I mean, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel sad, actually. It makes me feel sad, but part of my frustration is I cannot walk across to the courthouse and say, bring this file over to the sports tribunal. I wish I could do that.
What stops you?
First of all, propriety. Secondly, the fact that tribunals, like courts, should be moved by the parties. Yeah? I do not want to appear to have any interest in the matter beyond the matter being resolved quickly and in the best interest of the parties. So it is outside my remit to go to court and to say this matter belongs in the sports tribunal. If I had my way, I would say to the lawyers involved, please bring that matter across to the sports tribunal. We will resolve it within 2 months. It will be resolved. I'm aware because, of course, I'm part of the sports fraternity. I listen to what is happening within the sports fraternity, and I know how long cases that go there to the courthouse take. You mentioned the athletics elections. Another one is Kenya Swimming Federation. There is a constitutional petition that was filed there challenging the elections of the Kenya Swimming Federation. It's been there now 3-4 years as well. And the Swimming Federation cannot move on. It cannot elect its officials. It continues to be under the supervision now of FINA, which is the international swimming body. Prior to that, as the sports tribunal, we tried to assist in the governance of the Swimming Federation. But the fact is, it is stuck in court. And whilst it is stuck in court with an order preventing the federation from holding elections, they cannot move on. And that's very sad. Yeah.
When you look at those 2 cases that you have mentioned, what is striking about them?
Well, what is striking about them is the fact that I think sometimes, unfortunately, as sports people, as players in the sports industry, I think people choose forums in order to advance their own causes. Now, if you're looking to frustrate an election, or if you're looking to advance your own cause, you will probably go to a forum that you think will suit your purposes. And so when people file their disputes in court rather than in the tribunal, they are looking to play a long game in order to maybe frustrate the process, maybe position themselves better for a forthcoming election, or somehow pummel the other party into submission just by the passage of time. So this is a cynical way.
Personal interest.
Well, if you're my assessment of a lot of people who vie for office for federations is there's a good number who are truly interested in advancing the sport. But there's also a lot of them who are there because they are interested in what sport can bring to them in terms of travel, in terms of raising their profile, in terms of some simple things like allowances and so on. And the jostling for positions in sports federations very much mirrors our own political system, really. So when you understand how our political system works, you will understand how the elections for our sports federations work. And so I find that sometimes people do not want a quick resolution. And they know that if they come to the tribunal, there will be a quick resolution. And so they go to another forum that they can exploit in a cynical manner. Yeah.
And, as a tribunal, and of course now when you cast a bird's eye view, how sports disputes should be handled in this country, are there recommendations, for example, as a tribunal you would make on how, the courts would expedite, such cases?
Well, first and foremost, I think there should be greater sensitization for judges and magistrates as to the existence not just of the sports tribunal, but other tribunals across the country, dealing with different facets of our lives as Kenyans. Because there's many tribunals, and their purpose is to be able to expedite disputes within the areas in which those tribunals have jurisdiction. Sometimes the problem is that judges and magistrates rely to a significant extent on advocates to bring to their attention the existence of another forum like the sports tribunal. I think that judges and magistrates should educate themselves, or should have forums in which they are educated as to the existence of these other tribunals and what their remit is, so that when a matter comes before you as a judge, you don't actually have to wait for an opposing lawyer or an opposing party to point out that this belongs to the tribunal, but so you can send it there yourself. That way, number one, it unclogs your own backlog, and number two, it sends it to a more efficacious forum, and one that is established by law for just that very purpose, which is to take it out of your hands and put it in the hands of somebody better equipped to handle that dispute.
Help us understand, what is the scope and jurisdiction of the sports dispute tribunal?
Yeah, the scope of the tribunal from the Act does appear to be very limited. We deal with appeals from decisions by the sports registrar, and then we also deal with appeals from decisions by sports federations relating to disciplinary issues, relating to selections for Kenyan teams or Kenyan squads. We also deal with disputes relating to elections under the sports registrar's regulations. But then there is also a provision which says any other sports-related dispute. But it carries a proviso which says which the parties agree to bring before the tribunal and which the tribunal agrees to hear. Now, in my view, that provision should be amended to simply read any other sports-related dispute. It should not require the agreement of the parties for the tribunal to hear a sports-related dispute. The nature of disputes is that one party has a grievance which it wants resolved quickly. The other party probably does not want that grievance resolved. And of course, there will therefore be a party who may oppose the tribunal hearing the matter, because the tribunal will try to resolve that dispute as quickly as possible. So when you introduce a provision which says which the parties agree to hear, you are then allowing one party the foothold to frustrate the work of the tribunal. And so for me, that is a limitation which is which need not have been introduced by Parliament, but it is there. And so one of the things we're constantly having to do is to deal with objections to our jurisdiction brought by various parties, brought by their lawyers, and so on. And that always seems to be one of the questions, the first questions we have to answer as a tribunal. Do we have jurisdiction to deal with this issue or not? And it takes up our time, which is unnecessary.
And for me, I think you specifically talking about Section 58B.
Absolutely.
Of
the Sports Act.
Yes. So, are you in talks with the Ministry of Sports or with the National Parliament to see how this can be amended? Because, as you are saying, I mean, it's a challenge to the existence of the tribunal.
Yes. We have on several occasions put forward proposals for the amendment of the Sports Act to that extent. I've expressed the view before that I think the Sports Act is a poor piece of legislation, in my view. Yes.
Piece of legislation.
Yes. It could be a much better piece of legislation. Before this new government came into place, I had actually very extensive discussions with Ambassador Amina Mohammed about reforming the Sports Act, because I do think the Sports Act needs reform. I think it needs to be looked at, not just minor amendments, but extensively, in order to ensure that
it requires total overhaul.
It requires a total overhaul to make the provisions more effective, not just provisions that allow a governance structure, but provisions that promote the professionalization of sports. And I don't think it is a fit-for-purpose piece of legislation. I think we need to look around. We need to look around globally, see what other jurisdictions are doing about their sporting legislation, and to borrow and educate ourselves very heavily from those. I think the Sports Act was probably passed in a hurry. It's a compromise piece of legislation, and I think it is time that it was looked at afresh.
In terms of jurisdiction, because this is now comes in, it brings the question of law, whether, it is within the jurisdiction of the tribunal to listen to some of these disputes. How often does this come up, and how do you deal with this?
It comes up every time we have a controversial case. Jurisdiction will be brought up. Every time there's an issue about the Football Kenya Federation elections, the first thing they will say is, you don't have jurisdiction. Every time we have a dispute brought by a player relating to the payment of his wages, or unfair termination, or something that otherwise impacts the sports person, and the federation does not want it dealt with, they will bring up the question of jurisdiction. So jurisdiction is something we are always having to deal with when we're dealing with sports cases. We also deal with doping matters, incidentally, doping violations, just so you know. There is no question as to our jurisdiction. But when it comes to sports matters, we're constantly having to deal with that.
And the other issue that you really have to deal with is with your tribunal, has the jurisdiction to listen to matters, employment and contracts. That I know, the most preferred, avenue has always been the Employment and Labor Relations Court.
Yes.
How are you going around these, and do you believe it is high time that now that provision is made clear?
Certainly. Let me give you an example, for instance. So if you're a football player, you're employed by a club. The club pays your wages, and the club is supposed to, if it terminates your employment, it is supposed to terminate your employment on the basis of due process. But the club is also supposed to be able to facilitate your transfer to another club when the transfer window opens, and if another club expresses an interest in you and your talent at a better rate of remuneration, and if you're interested in it. Now, the Employment and Labor Relations Court, would not be sensitive to the timelines within which these things need to be activated. So if you come to the Sports Tribunal and say the transfer window, we're in May, for instance, say the transfer window is going to close at the end of May. I need to move on. My club needs to give me a certificate allowing me to exit my club and move on because my club no longer wants to retain me. Now, if the Employment and Labor Relations Court takes 4 years to resolve that dispute, what do you think happens to this player? Yeah? Because that is the ordinary timeline within which the Employment and Labor Relations Court may resolve an employment dispute in the ordinary course of things. The player will be left without a club because his present club has terminated his employment. He does not have the ability to transfer to another club. The transfer window is a very short window. It opens and closes. Once it closes, you cannot move. Yeah? So therefore, that player requires a forum that is sensitive to those things, a forum that can resolve his issue with his employer as quickly as possible and enable him to move on. A player, to be able to perform at the highest level, needs to be in a proper mental state. If you are playing for Club X, meanwhile your mind is still on your unpaid wages and your dispute with your former club, you're not in a proper mental and psychological state to be able to train effectively, to be able to exhibit your talent to the best of your ability. And so it significantly impairs your ability to perform as a player. And so, in my view, sports people should not be required to go before a normal employment court because it completely negates the reason why there's a sports tribunal which is established to resolve their problems, which include the fact that problems will occur in relation to your relationship with your employer, which is another sports club.
Do you receive enough support from the judiciary in your quest to deal with sports disputes?
What do you mean by support?
Support in the sense that, number one, at the Kenyan courts, are alive to the fact that there is a tribunal that is supposed to handle these cases. And so before they deal with, sports dispute, they first of all exhaust this matter, or do they first of all refer this matter to the sports tribunal?
My answer is no.
It's no.
No. I don't think that courts are sufficiently sensitive to the place of the tribunal, to the way that the tribunal functions, and to the effective and effectual manner in which tribunals are able to deliver justice with specific reference to people in the sports fraternity. We have had, for instance, situations where, as a tribunal, we've made a decision in relation to the employment of a player, and an employment court has gone and quashed that decision on the basis that the tribunal did not have jurisdiction. The jurisdiction was with the labor court. Yeah? And so that means that this player then has to go through the whole rigmarole of dealing with the technicalities of proving his case in the labor court. In the meantime, his wages are held up. In the meantime, he cannot move on to another team, and his whole career is significantly impaired.
So how are you dealing with this?
Well, back to reform. Back to reform. That's why I think there should be legislative reform, so that it is clear that matters relating to sports persons should be the preserve in the first instance of the tribunal. Yeah? So that sports people don't have to waste their time and their resources having to look for other forums to resolve their issues. Otherwise, what's the point of having a sports tribunal?
John, before we come to the end of this interview, I also want to hear from you. If you were to reform the sports dispute tribunal in this country, I would want to hear from you. How would you do it, and would you give it more teeth to bite?
Yes, certainly. I think that there is so much more the sports tribunal can do. Let's start with the fact that under the Act, the chairperson of the sports tribunal should be a person who should be qualified to hold the office of a judge, right? That tells you that the qualification of chairperson and therefore the tribunal has been put at that level. Then you look at the mix of skill sets that the Act requires of members of the tribunal. So there are people with learning in law, and then there are people with experience in sports. And that means, therefore, that there are matters that this tribunal has the capacity to handle, including policy matters around sports, including every nature of sports matter. I think the first stop should be the tribunal. The other thing is, of course, we have to recognize that sports is not just played within Nairobi, and that therefore the tribunal should be able to establish, shall I say, offices across the country, so that it is easy for sports people in the counties to be able to access the tribunal.
When you look at the last 9 years of the sports dispute tribunal, and you have been the chair in the last 7.5 years, and so you come with a tremendous experience in management of sports tribunals, disputes. Where do you see the tribunal going in the next 9 years?
That's something I've given considerable thought to. I worry about the tribunal being purely a decision-making body that just churns out technical decisions. I think that the tribunal does need to have a philosophy as part of its jurisprudential makeup. And I think that in order to do that, we do need to give it enabling legislation so that we expand the remit of the tribunal. I think that when the Judicial Service Commission comes to selecting new members of the tribunal, that it does need to give careful thought to the selection of members who will advance the work that we've done. I am conscious that my time is coming to an end, and that in the fullness of time there will be somebody else sitting in this chair. And I'm very concerned that it should be somebody who will be able to move the tribunal's agenda forward. But I think that this would be greatly helped if we were to put in place legislation that truly enables us to be a tribunal that seeks to advance first and foremost the best interests of the sports person. We must always have regard to the interest of the sports person. And if we can do that, then the tribunal really will have cemented its place in Kenya's sporting environment.
Good. Anything else?
No, thank you very much. Thank you for taking an interest in the work of the tribunal. Thank you for your time. And it seems to me that you have actually done some significant background research into our work, for which I am very grateful. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Yes. Your time is highly appreciated.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, City Council John Ohaga is the chairperson of the Sports Dispute Tribunal, joining us on this week's episode of Inside Government to help us understand the role of the tribunal and the challenges they are facing and how they should be addressed. You're watching Inside Government. My name is O'Brien Kimani. We'll do this again on Friday next week. Until then, have a safe and good afternoon.